This video will cover dividing integers. Now there are two things to keep in mind when dividing integers. The first thing is that we're just going to divide the whole numbers the way they are and ignore the signs, whether they're negative or positive. Then the second part of this is going to be that you have to then take into consideration the negative and positive signs. And the way this works, the rule says, when multiplying and dividing integers, or signed numbers in general, an even number of negative signs will leave your answer positive, while an odd number of negative signs will leave your answer negative. And the reason behind this is that if you have an even number of negative signs, each pair will cancel each other out. But if you have an odd number of negative signs, all the pairs that are there will cancel, but since it's odd, there'll always be one left over. So let's look at some examples. Our first example is negative 20 divided by a positive 4. So the first rule tells us to just deal with the whole parts. 20 divided by 4 is 5. And now we're concerned with the negative signs. It was a negative divided by a positive, which means we had an odd number of negative signs, one of them. So since there's an odd number of negatives, the negative will remain because there's nothing there for it to cancel with. So our answer is negative 5. Our next example is a negative 12 divided by a negative 3. So the first part of this is just to take the whole parts, 12 divided by 3. And this answer is going to be 4. Now we need to consider how many negative signs there are. In this problem, it's a negative divided by a negative, which means there's an even number of negative signs. There's 2 of them. So these negatives will cancel each other out, leaving our quotient to be a positive 4. Our next example is a positive 18 divided by a negative 3. Again, we're just going to take the whole parts and divide. 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now, this was a positive divided by a negative, so there's one negative sign. Since there's an odd number of negatives, the negative will stay because he doesn't have a partner or a second negative to cancel with. So there's an odd number, so the odd man's out, so he stays. Our next example is negative 4 divided by negative 4. In this case, these numbers are exactly the same. So we can guess that our answer is going to be 1, because anything divided by itself is always just 1. Let's go ahead and see if this comes out to be true in this case. The whole part says 4 divided by 4, and that's going to be 1. And a negative, when we divide those, well, they're going to cancel each other out. So our answer is going to be a positive 1, just as we suspected. Our final example is 0 divided by a negative 2. When you have 0 and you divide it by anything, it doesn't matter what this is going to be, your quotient is still just going to be 0. Because really this is asking, you have 0 apples and you're breaking them up into groups, and how many will go in each group? Well, 0 apples to begin with means 0 in each group, which means 0.